At the heart of everything we do is mission. We are the church here in these villages, and we're here to serve the spiritual and pastoral needs of the community, the whole community, whether or not they worship regularly. In days of old, a church served many purposes. It was used not just for worship, but as a gathering place, as a market, a school, a place where travellers could rest, a court, etc. As communities developed and separate schools and market halls and community centres were built, the multifunctioning of churches contracted, and they shrank to becoming places reserved mainly for Sunday worship, visited only by the faithful or the wider community for civic services or occasional offices, as well as places of historical, architectural and social interest. But church is about people. It's about the body of Christ, reaching out to all in the parish. And churches need to be living, breathing and vibrant buildings where lots of things happen. If they don't, they die, and they become merely historic statements. The needs and expectations of society are changing, and that applies to church as much as to society at large. Worship needs to be varied and flexible, catering for a variety of preferences. And a sense of belonging and being part of church as the body of Christ needs to be nurtured. Churches need worship spaces and social spaces and meeting spaces. They need to be safe and comfortable and welcoming. Today, the most vibrant churches are once again places where many things apart from Sunday worship happen. They are becoming once again real centres of mission, places which are used 7 days a week for a variety of purposes. It is that vision of mission which is, I believe, at the heart of our hopes and dreams for the future of this, our main parish church. It has been on the parish wish list for a number of years. It's part of our parish profile, that working document which sets out who we are and who we would like to become. The kitchen and the lavatory were the first moves towards that. Now, our much talked of but rather fluid proposals for the bell tower have been firmed up, and that's thanks to our dear late John Brazier, who left us a legacy of £10,000 towards the project. When we started to firm up our thoughts on the bell tower, our ideas were mission-led. We wanted to make the church a vibrant centre which people would use for a variety of purposes during the week, where a variety of worship patterns and their associated fellowship could take place in a comfortable, warm and safe environment, flexible enough to cope with all the requirements we would place upon it. So while the proposals might seem at face value practical ones, underpinning them all is that all-important concept of mission. And mission not just in the here and now, but for future generations as well. The way people do church will look very different in 100 years. And in this scheme, we have the opportunity of ensuring that this church can continue to be church, that the heritage of our church building remains a living heritage, and that it continues to be at the centre of the village, literally, spiritually, pastorally, and socially. The PCC is pleased to have been able to take forward the dream thus far, and to be able to place these proposals before you. There is a financial cost, of course, and any venture of this kind inevitably causes a big intake of collective breath. The project will take time commitment and effort. But other churches in our area, some of them much smaller than ours, have undertaken such projects very successfully and are now reaping the rewards. And if they can do it, so can we here in Bledlow, Saunderton and Horsenden. And we can also have a lot of fun and fellowship on the way, which this parish is very good at. So now, please listen carefully to the architect's presentation and then give us your feedback. You'll find a feedback form on the website or at the back of the church. Please return your completed form to the church or pop it through the rectory letterbox before the 12th of May. We need your feedback. After this is God's church in this place, it is your church in your place. And this must be a shared vision if it's to go ahead. We will not all agree with everything or with each other, but we need to find a shared way forward.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming and being prepared to listen to me. And thank you, Martin. That was very, very kind words, and some things I haven't heard there, so I didn't realise about the competition I was against when I submitted. That's very interesting. You certainly do. So he's given me a very nice introduction, and I was going to talk a bit about who I am, but he's done that, so I won't say too much more. Just to say that as an architect, I do have a different approach to working with buildings that some other architects do, and I know we have another architect here, so I'm going to be careful what I say, but I have a love for historic buildings, and I work with a lot of churches, mainly churches, some historic houses too, and I'll work with anything old, not necessarily buildings even. I like old things. And really, my aim is not really to leave my mark, but not to leave my mark, if that makes sense. I like to try and work with a historic structure or building in a way that isn't really obvious necessarily, isn't taking away from what's there, but either enhancing it or certainly preserving what's really valuable. I can sympathise with those who are concerned about their historic environment, and I understand that, and I hope what I'm going to show tonight shows a way that we can add vitally needed facilities, but in a way that doesn't destroy what people love here. Obviously it's more than a building, it's been mentioned, but it is a building, it's a bit of history as well. So I'm going to go through a bit of the history of this building. I'm not an expert by any means, and I'm sure some of you will probably know a lot more than me, but really just to show how this building's developed over the last 1,000 years, or around that time. Some of it's slightly conjectural. I'm going to start in the 12th century. Now, before this time, I don't think we know too much. There may have been a wooden structure here. I'm not sure there's any evidence about that, but it's quite likely. In the 12th century, certainly a stone structure was built, and it may have had an apse at the east end. That's conjectural, so don't take that as being how it was. There was probably something like that there, and the font that we see today was at the east end somewhere. And as some of you may know, the font's quite special. It's one of a group of fonts called the Aylesbury font, and there are several. And they really are very special fonts, very historic, very old. So moving on to the early 13th century, the south aisle is added. Probably a lot of what was built in the 12th century still remained at that time. Now, the late 13th century, things really changed, and it's really starting to look like the building that we see today. We've got north aisle, south aisle, we've got columns, we've got a tower, we've got a chancel, so it's starting to really look a bit like the building we're in at the moment. 14th and 15th century, the porch was constructed, various windows added, a couple of windows blocked in, and probably a bit of modernisation here and there. At the same time, the font disappears, According to the book, goes into storage or gets put somewhere, we're not sure where. And it appears possibly sometime in the 18th or 19th century. At that time, pews appear, of which we have the platforms remaining, which we're on at the moment. The pulpit, the organ in the late 19th century, steps up to the altar in 1777, which we have an exact date for. So again, really looking like the building we have today, but it then changed again. So looking at the 20th and 21st century, the pews went sometime around the beginning of the 20th century. Various changes. The organ moved to the kind of the west side, obviously near the side chapel. The font, probably in the late 20th century, moved to this location. Again, some of you may know exactly when, so apologies if I'm getting the details a bit wrong. Finally, 21st century, toilet, separate vestry, much needed facilities, kitchen, which I think is probably 20th century actually. So we get a few facilities, and the toilet's a really good one. A lot of churches don't have a toilet, so the fact you do have one is a really good thing actually, and it's no mean feat to have put that in. So that's just a very brief overview, just showing how the church has developed. And some may think this is how it's always been, but clearly it hasn't. It's changed and developed as times have changed, as needs have changed, as fashions and styles have changed, and types of worship as well. So by no means is what we're proposing tonight really anything different than what's happened over the history of this building. So what are the needs? What is it that this church really needs? Well, I'm really going to talk about the practical things partly. And one notable thing, and not so much tonight, it's been quite warm recently, but the heating system, as probably most of you know, it's quite noisy. I was quite shocked to hear it the first time. It's a bit smelly and not particularly efficient. And it's done very well. I believe it's been here quite a long time, but I think it's probably time that a better heating system is put in. So as part of this proposal, we're suggesting that a new heating system is put in. There is a heating report. We've had a specialist who I've worked with on many churches look into all the different types of heating. There's biomass, solar. There are lots of different methods we've looked at. So it's not just a case that we've gone for one. We've been looking at the viability of all these different methods. And the conclusion really is that an oil-fired boiler is probably the most practical and cost-efficient way of providing new heating. We've got issues. I won't go into all of it because there's a long document, which I'm sure you could probably look at if you want. But biomass, we have issues of space where you keep the pellets. It is a Grade 1 listed building, so we can't necessarily build a shed on the side to keep things. So we've looked at all these different things, and this is kind of the conclusion we've come to. And the heating system would probably be run, obviously from a main boiler, but you would have fan-assisted radiators positioned around the edge. They've not been chosen yet, obviously. There are different styles and different types available, but it would have to be something like that. You either have to go for a radiator, you need the fan assistance to blow the warm air into the middle, or you go for the high-level radiators, a bit like those, which they are quite effective at heating a surface, but I don't think visually they work particularly well, and most people I know are not a big fan of those. So we normally avoid that kind of thing if we can with a new heating system. Now, one of the other things that we want to tackle is the floor levels. We've got the pew platforms here, a bit of history, but you only have to move your chair a few inches in the wrong way, and potentially you've got a bit of a problem. The levels in here really need to be taken away, so we have one level, and we're suggesting putting a new stone floor throughout, so that it's one level, and that gives you many advantages. If you think meetings like tonight, even possibly a concert or anything where you want to move chairs around, where you don't want to be stuck to these wooden platforms, one floor would really get around that and really make the whole area flexible. So that's kind of one of the main suggestions, is doing this and laying this new stone floor throughout. We're not suggesting that we remove the floor in the chancel, but we would want to raise that existing floor so that it's the same level, so that you don't have a step down and step up. For things, I know the church is sometimes used for filming. I don't think that would hinder that, because they, as I believe, they often bring in their own furniture anyhow. Probably a flat floor would be more convenient anyhow, so I don't think it would stop anything like that, and it wouldn't impact visually on this area too much. Kitchen. It wouldn't be a fully catered kitchen with an oven, but it would be somewhere you could prepare food and drink. Obviously there is a worktop and a sink at the moment, so there are facilities, but maybe improving that would be a really good way of opening up the church, not just for Sundays, maybe after the service or for other church-related things, but it would also open up the church for other things during the week, maybe other activities that could be run. So improving those facilities is really vital. Now, accommodation. Sunday morning, I believe there's quite a conflict with Sunday school, with the service, with creche, with robing. Effectively, this is one space. And so you're going to have a conflict when you have different activities occurring at the same time. And so one of the big needs is to provide separate spaces. As a father of 3 young children, who I love dearly, I'm quite pleased when they go to creche and Sunday school, because although I love having them around, they are quite noisy and quite hard to manage. So I know the value of having a creche area that is pretty soundproof, if possible. Occasionally they knock on the door, which we hear, but a separate creche area is really valuable, but also having a visual link. And you'll see when I show you the proposal that we've tried to tackle both the soundproofing, but also that you can see your children and you're not completely separated from what's going on in the church. And we've also got choir robing areas needed, meeting spaces. So the proposal tries to tackle the need for these separate spaces for these different activities to avoid clashes, but also to provide spaces where you can have maybe a smaller meeting, spaces that you could maybe heat more easily than having to heat the whole church. So there are lots of different possibilities there, as well as storage, which you may have read on there. Storage, you can never have too much really. There's always lots of things that need storing. So we've tried to tackle the storage issue. You'll see that there are some large storage areas provided for chairs. Obviously you have moving chairs at the moment. If you get new chairs, to put those out of the way so you can have open spaces, assuming a flat floor. And also a separate flower area, and that's, you'll see, located near the organ. So nice and easy to go from there into the church and carry out those activities, which I'm not going to pretend I'm absolutely familiar with flower arranging, but I know the basic needs for a sink and a space and being able to get to them easily. Then finally, part of the scheme, you'll see, it's inserting a mezzanine floor. This will really help with the bell ringing. It will elevate the bell ringers a lot closer to the bell ropes. So that will be a real help, as well as being able to get into the tower a bit more easily. And the ladder's great, and the boxing is very good, but if you were that much higher, wouldn't it be that much easier to get up into that space as well? So I may have missed out some details. I'm sure there's a lot more that can be added to the list of requirements and the list of things that are met by the proposal, but that's just a brief outline. So I'd like to briefly go through how the scheme has developed. And apologies for all the description and all the talking, but I really want to kind of talk you through the process of where this has come from, how it's developed, how it wasn't really plucking design out of the air, and it's actually a process of thinking through the impact on the building, how we can meet the requirements and so on. So this is one of the 2 proposals that I originally submitted. To try and cover both bases, I went for an external extension as an option and also an internal. So the external, and obviously this was a fairly quick design. The only place you could put an external extension is on the north side. we thought about having a glazed entrance. It could be quite modern, maybe something more traditional to provide a meeting room, vestry. And so we came up with this design, but at the same time, you couldn't put all the accommodation you need in an external extension, so you would still need something internally. But it has to be investigated. I think you need to look at the different options. And the short list of pros and cons. On the plus side, it's a self-contained extension. It can be built while you're still using the church. The new accommodation can be absolutely tailor-made. You know, you can make the room exactly how you want it. You're not working with the existing building. You can improve the entrance or provide a different entrance, maybe. Also insulation, things like that are going to be absolutely up to date and up to spec. On the minus side, it's a grade 1 listed building, so putting an external extension is going to be a problem. English Heritage, the DAC, and a whole host of other people are probably not going to be that happy, however great the design is. Putting something on the outside of this building is going to be a real challenge. And also the cost. At the end of the day, when you build an external extension, it's going to cost quite a lot of money. And I looked at the costs, and I have to say up front, I'm not keen on an external extension. I try and avoid it with churches and try and keep everything internal if possible, because particularly with this church, it's very beautiful and it's a beautiful setting, and I personally don't see how you could extend it in a way that doesn't damage that. So that's my personal point of view. Have the church, you know, if the church wants an external extension, I'm happy to investigate that. So that was one of the first options, and then we went on to this option, which is the one I really personally would go for. And that's really putting all the new accommodation at the tower end and the side chapels. It really leaves this main space alone. It's an end that already has your toilet, it has your vestry, it's got screens, it's fairly well shielded off already, so it's not an open space that you really necessarily consider as part of this space. So to me, it seemed an obvious place to put new accommodation. And the challenge is obviously how to do that. My first attempt was to have quite a modern staircase, something glass that was transparent, and we've shifted on from that since then. But you know, it's a matter of, you know, you have to put something down and you develop that idea and you see how people react. So again, pros, the external looks retained, the cost is less, the new facilities are kept in the building, so activities are kept in the building rather than having to necessarily go into a separate part. But on the minus side, obviously, if this work goes ahead, there will be disruption. You can't put down a new floor, for example, and still use the church at the same time. So these are fairly common things that happen when you do building work, but they need to be considered. And the look of the interior is impacted as well. But again, it would have been with the other option. So this is the final proposal, or where we are with it today. The basic idea is that the central arch has a glazed infill. We insert a floor. So this is a mezzanine floor that you can see. I hope that makes sense. So that's a section kind of cutting through that way. Glazed upper half, and that can be used for creche or Sunday school. It's acoustic glass, so it's not soundproof, but it's very, very good. And somewhere like Stoke Church, St. Peter and St. Paul's have used acoustic glass for a very, very similar meeting room, and it's very good. You won't have a problem with disturbance from the activities that happen there if you have a service at the same time. On the ground floor, we've got fold back doors, so that really opens up the west end. So you could open the west doors, have a procession or a wedding coming through. It creates a bit of a draft lobby, but at the same time you can fold those doors right back. On the right, we've got our stairs. They're oak construction. This is how it's developed. They're tucked right into the corner. We looked at a way of trying to put the stairs internally within the accommodation, but effectively you lose two rooms. You lose the space for the stairs on the ground, and then when it comes up as well, you lose that space. And it kind of called into question doing it because you lost so much. So it's the only place that it feasibly can go, but it is tucked back. It doesn't damage what's there. And although it's not shown, the monument in the corner can stay. It's a fairly traditional oak construction, oak panelled, so it's kind of fitting to this building and to the style. Now there are some more images, so hopefully you'll understand a bit better as we go on how this works. And apologies for not having a laser pointer. So new accommodation on the ground floor. We've got the existing toilet and vestry. They stay as they are, so we're not suggesting that they get taken out because obviously they're quite recent. We don't really want to take out what's been done and redo it. So we would keep that as it is. We've got this central meeting room or lobby with the bifold doors, which are on the outer arch. And then we've got glazed doors in front of the existing west doors to create a draft lobby. So that's a really nice little area, nice entrance, with a servery from the kitchen coming off it. So you can see that could be used really well for obviously serving drinks as an alternative entrance, and for meetings. It's really got so many uses. New kitchen, and then a plant room, which is where your current flue, the chimney, is at the moment. It's the ideal location. You've got a flue there, obviously. You may as well reuse that. And a new boiler would need its own little room as well, so that's the ideal place for it. Level floor throughout until we get to the chancel steps. And the font would be taken off the base that it's on at the moment and put onto the new floor. The base is relatively modern. I don't believe it's particularly convenient in using, and many churches are doing this at the moment. I'm not saying that's a reason to do it, but it does make sense to do that at the same time. Now, kind of zooming in to the west end, this is just a bit more detail, really. So we've got the flower area here, which would be on this side of our new partition. The stairs over there with a cupboard underneath, obviously the existing toilet and vestry, meeting room. I hope that makes some sense. And moving up to the first floor. So you come up the stairs, you've got a little lobby or landing, toilet, which could serve the creche, for example, or Sunday school activity, kind of a fairly vital thing nowadays, and also fairly well above the existing toilet, so you've got the plumbing there already, so that's really handy. Then we've got a store in the corner, and that's the altar-frontal cupboard, that kind of block down there. We've also suggested secondary glazing as well. Again, this has been done in similar churches. It really helps with the heating in this area. And it protects the windows as well if it's a creche area and you've got children near those windows. It's quite helpful also to have another barrier. The First World War memorial screen that's currently between the kitchen area and the base of the tower, we're suggesting that that's reused to form this kind of storage area on the first floor. So rather than losing it, we incorporate it there. It would need some adjustment, but the majority of it could remain and be incorporated. So I hope that makes some sense. I'll show you some slightly more interesting images that, because I know plans are, a lot of people look at plans and don't necessarily understand them, and I can understand why that is as well. Hopefully the next images, apologies for the colour and style, but it really gives you an impression of the space, hopefully. So this is standing roughly where I am and looking west. The seats are a suggestion, obviously. That's obviously a discussion you would need to have, what seats you might have. You can see the new stairs. You can see the glazing infilling the arch on the first floor. And it's really an oak kind of cornice detail that goes all the way across, that divides, really hides where the floor is actually sticking out. Folding doors, flower area on the left. And I'll show you some more images that hopefully show that a bit better. So again, the stairs tucked right into the corner. And again, when you put new stairs into a building like this, we've got to bear in mind building regulations. So we can't just put in a really short stair to cram into a corner. It does have to conform to standards. And unfortunately, stairs are quite big when you get to a public building, which this would be classed as. So it has to be a certain width. The treads have to be a certain depth and a certain height. So it's actually, stairs are one of the most tricky elements when it comes to working with a historic building, because you can't just cram it in a corner like, in some cottages where you've got a little windy stair. It's got to be usable by, all folk, really. Again, another view, kind of looking from the flower arranging area. And that would have a concealed sink, so it would be a lift up top. And I'll show you an example of that in a few minutes. And again, just looking over towards the stairs, glass infill, 4 back doors. I hope this is kind of explaining the concept. And then basically outside the new kitchen, kind of looking out this way, and those circles they're meant to be lights, just if you want to know. And then the room above, so this would be the new meeting room, or creche, or Sunday school, or whatever it gets used for, which could be many things. The circle is obviously the bell ringing frame that's up there, just to remind you where it is. Kind of the marks on the glass, you would need some kind of what's called a manifestation on the glass, so people don't run into the glass. So you would normally have some kind of design on the glass so people can actually see it's there. And that could be any design. It could be writing, it could be any logo the church wants. And then looking back, new toilet, lobby, sinister looking gentleman on the landing. And then another view, meeting room, suggested table and chairs. Obviously that isn't an accurate representation of the screen that's there. I'm afraid it's a bit of a simplified version. Now here are some other churches who have done similar things. St. Peter and St. Paul's, Stoke Church, very close. This is one I did. There's a couple of photos before. It's a different church in many ways, but I think the principles are the same. They had a gallery or a balcony, and we extended that, and we really lightened up the whole church. And there are some contemporary elements in here. So we've used oak, we've used glass, new stone floor, and really opened up the church. And I think it's worked quite successfully. It's maybe slightly unusual, but whenever you work with a building like this, often the design has to be unique because you have to treat each building individually. So, you know, there are some interesting elements and quirks, and we've tried to reuse some of the existing oak panelling from how it was before. So I think reuse is good, especially when you've got some good quality panelling. If you can reuse that, it's really good. And then just a few other churches where they've, again, worked with oak, infilling arches, providing these kind of facilities. That's Princess Risborough at the bottom, again, showing how you can kind of hide cabinets and sinks and so on. And at the right at the bottom is another small project I worked on. I don't know if you can see that, but this is what's called a Corian worktop. It's a kind of plastic, minerally moulded worktop. It's got an insert that you lift out, and under it you have a sink, and the tap is telescopic. So they had a really tight space. It was a 2 metre depth and a couple of metres wide, and they had to fit a kitchen in. There are some really clever ways of concealing sinks and putting in a lot of facilities in, again, it was a grade 1 listed building. There are some clever ways of dealing with these things. So I just wanted to show that there are some really clever and modern techniques for dealing with old buildings. Finally, the last bit, which will work, is a fly-through. You just let me find the right. And obviously this is, again, just to help communicate the design, really. So don't worry too much necessarily about the colours and things like that. A window seat would be needed in front of the west window, really, to allow the doors to open underneath because of the shape of them. So that's kind of why there's a window seat there, just if you were wondering. There's the sinister gentleman. And that would be the draft lobby, so glass doors that could open out, but obviously the existing doors remain there. In principle, you could open those doors and have the glass there, so you don't let in all the cold, but you have a view through. Okay, well, I hope that's roughly communicated the design. I hope that's understandable. There's going to be a brief time for questions anyhow.